Today on the podcast review show, we're looking at the Sci-Fi Movie podcast.
Thicken up your skin and get ready for a supersized serving of opinion. Delivering constructive criticism and powerful praise, it's the podcast review show. This is the podcast that takes the guesswork out of first-time impressions. You'll discover new podcasts while learning podcasting tips. Join in on the conversation via voicemail, email, comments, and polls. It's all at our website, podcastreviewshow.com.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the podcast review show. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. And before we get into anything, I always like to mention to people that what you're getting here today is a little thing called an opinion. And it's an opinion that we've been asked for, and you can always agree with it or you can disagree with it, but it's an opinion. It's not fatal, and you'll be okay. And joining me, as always, good. I hear a sigh of relief. And from Podcast Talent Coach, the one, the only, Erik K. Johnson. How are you doing, my friend?
I am very well, Dave. Looking forward to another fun-filled episode here of the podcast review show. We were telling Rem here a little earlier, our guest, that it's kind of like getting a shot. You're not quite sure how much it's going to hurt. You just kind of brace for it and take it as it comes.
Yeah. So,
but it is our opinion.
There you go. And I'm going to let you tackle Rem's last name.
Great. I'm guessing, but Rem, I'm guessing Le Victoire.
You know, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I know people who still pronounce it better than I do. If I was to give it a proper French pronunciation, I would say it's Le Victoire.
Le Victoire.
La Victoire. And you have to do the hand.
How do you pronounce it?
La Victoire. But I don't do the la at the end. I just say...
You should.
Little hand flourish. I would say, hi, I'm Rem La Victoire. That's how I'd say it. So you were pretty close.
I was close.
In French, it means the victorious one.
Excellent.
Yes, I know it's a lot to live up to.
I knew I should have gone by Le Victoire.
Yeah, there you go. Erik La Victoire.
Yeah. Instead, I get Johnson. I don't know. I think I got the short end of the stick there.
You got a name that's easier to spell, my friend.
Yeah, I was going to say. Well, Rem, tell everybody where we can find your podcast.
The podcast is found at sci-fi movie podcast.com. And what we did, too, because sometimes people will spell sci-fi with a little dash and sometimes without it, we got both domains. So if you go to sci-fi moviepodcast.com, it'll take you there, but you can also go to just Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, and they'll both take you to the same place.
Brilliant. I love it.
That's right. Thinking ahead there.
Mm-hmm.
And we always like to ask, why did you get into podcasting?
Well, I was thinking about this today because I thought you might ask this question, and my background's radio. I did radio for a bunch of years, and had a bunch of audio equipment and always loved doing audio stuff. I used to mix audio in those big reel-to-reels at the radio station. Erik will know about those. And when I got out of radio, I still wanted to have some sort of creative outlet. And right around 2005, I discovered the show Lost. And then I discovered Cliff Ravenscraft. And I started listening to his podcast, and he had mentioned that he was looking for somebody to do some intros and extras for him. And I thought, I could do that. So I emailed him, sent him a sample, and we started collaborating. And I started getting into doing, audio and voice work for podcasts, and hadn't really thought at that point about doing one myself. A few years later, I thought, I'd really like to do something, but I didn't have the right idea. And I really wanted to make sure that if I was going to do it, I wanted to make sure I had something that had longevity, something that I really enjoyed, and something that wouldn't pod fade. So podcasting about sci-fi seemed like a very, very natural extension because it's been something that I've loved all my life. So having that creativity is really important to be able to express.
Got it. And then who do you think is your target audience?
Target audience, mostly male. We've been looking at our Facebook numbers. We keep track of the people who respond to our comments on Facebook. Generally, our listener seems to be a male. Usually about 28 to about 40, maybe 45. Usually employed in some sort of technical field. technically inclined, because technically inclined people seem to have more of an interest and a grasp of science fiction. These kind of guys tend to be into movies, they tend to be into comics, they tend to be into video games. So yeah, generally that age range, though we are seeing more women log in and sign up to our podcast, which is quite good too.
Well, how can you deny the power of Shatner to women?
He's a force unto himself.
So, Eric, any questions for Rem before we hit play on the beginning of the show?
I don't think so.
Right.
I'm ready to rock and roll.
Let's let her fly.
What about your brother? What's his name?
Timmy.
Is Timmy around here too? Maybe hiding like you were. Mom and Dad? Newt. Look at me. Where are they?
They're dead. All right, can I go now?
I'm sorry, Newt. Don't you think you'd be safer here with us? These people are here to protect you. You're soldiers.
It won't make any difference.
The Sci-Fi Movie Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, digging deeper into the sci-fi movies that we all love. My name is Rem.
And I'm Ian. You can find this show and all our previous reviews on iTunes. Search Sci-Fi Movie Podcast in iTunes and subscribe to the show. It's free, and you'll get the newest episode right away on your computer, tablet, phone, phablet, interstellar vox, introcetor, or cosmic teletype.
I'm Jonathan. Join our Facebook page at Sci-Fi Movie Podcast and email us with your comments and suggestions. Email us at feedback@sci-fi-moviepodcast.com.
And join the conversation on Twitter. Follow us at Sci-Fi Movie Guys and send us a tweet. The Sci-Fi Movie Podcast is made possible by Patreon and Wayland Yutani, building better worlds.
This time we explore Aliens from 1986, directed by James Cameron.
It's been 57 years since the crew of the Nostromo discovered alien eggs on LV-426. Now, that planet has been colonized. Ripley is discovered in hypersleep and woken just as contact with the colony is lost. She is asked to consult for a group of space marines who are on a mission to find out what happened to the colonists. Is it just a broken transmitter, or something more terrifying waiting for them?
Kane, the crew member. Kane, who went into that ship, said he saw thousands of eggs there. Thousands.
Thank you. That will be all.
God damn it! That's not all! Because if one of those things gets down here, then that will be all. Then all this bullshit that you think is so important, you can just kiss all that goodbye.
Coming this time on the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, it is Aliens from 1986. We're going to dig into this movie, and there's a lot to talk about. We'll find out what worked with the movie, what didn't work, some great and very interesting production notes and trivia, and we'll talk more about the film as we go. And we always like to start with what worked with a particular movie, and there's going to be a lot here. So, Ian, get us started. What worked with Aliens from 1986?
And we'll pause it there. You'll have to hear the rest. So that's the first basically 3 minutes of the show. And it's interesting because part of it, my first reaction is, why are they telling me to contact them? I don't even know these people. But on the other hand, you did it in such an entertaining way, it made me giggle. So it overcame the, who are these people? And why would I want to contact them? But it was like, hey, this sounds, it launched to me the atmosphere of the show, which was kind of fun and bubbly and things of that nature. Eric, what were your thoughts on the beginning?
I like the part where Rem says digging deeper into sci-fi movies. I think that really sets the show up for the sci-fi fan. We're not just going to review the show on a cursory, superficial level. We're going to really dig deep and discuss this at a really stellar, deep dive. And we get into it, too. We get into some deep stuff there that got me lost. And I've seen the movie. So yeah, I thought it set it up really well at the beginning there with the digging deeper into sci-fi movies.
Yeah, and we have a couple clips here, and there were the thing that I think the key here is it's a deep dive, and there are two things that you have to know about the reviewer in this case, Rem. Number one, I'm not a huge sci-fi person, although I watched Captain America 1 and 2 this weekend.
Good for you. Good for you.
That's a start there, Dave.
I was somewhat tortured as a child with Star Trek because I had to watch Hee Haw and Star Trek on Saturday nights. My dad controlled the control channel, and I wanted to watch, I don't know, the Glenn Campbell show or something.
Wow,
And,
I'm so sorry for you.
Yeah. So it was, and my sister loves Star Trek, and I'm telling you, I have seen the Tribble episode no less than 9 times because if it's on, she's watching it. So, so now on the other hand, I really like the movie Alien, the one that you guys reviewed. I was like, oh, cool. So, so let's play some clips here. Some of the things that I thought were cool. Let's start off with something that you did that I thought was really cool. So you were talking about one of the this vehicle that what is her name in the movie? Sigourney?
Oh, Sigourney Weaver, Ripley.
Ripley. Okay, Ripley is riding this cool thing, and so I love the fact that you guys threw in trivia.
I get that.
And from a trivia perspective, we might talk about this a bit later on, but this vehicle is actually a towing vehicle used for towing 747s. It was being used at I think it was the Heathrow Airport, and they managed to get hold of this vehicle, and apparently it was about 75 tons, just a huge, huge vehicle, and they had to take about 35 tons of steel and lead off of it in order to make it functional. So this is an actual vehicle that was being used to carry or to tow 747s to the runways. So very interesting vehicle. I would love to have seen it fire its weapons. That would have been great.
So I love the way you described it. I was kind of like getting a picture of it and how they had to peel stuff off of it. And I was at the time I was like, I want to go watch this movie now because I forget what it looked like. So, and the fact that you gave it like a backstory that you don't get that from watching the movie, that's the good side of the vehicle. The part that I was kind of like, really? Was this one.
Moving on to more things that didn't work.
There's what? There's more?
There's more.
Oh my God.
There's more.
Wow,
so the APC that they drive in, while very cool, doesn't seem very useful for off-roading. It doesn't seem like an assault vehicle or a vehicle that you would take down to a planet and just drive around anywhere. The wheels are huge, but the chassis is super low and doesn't have much ground clearance. It felt like just a rock, the size of, say, my torso is going to stop it.
I don't understand the design of that, but I think maybe it's because of the design of the colony's entranceways and everything that was designed to be able to go in there. And as you can see, also it was almost like a transformer, so all the guns could be lowered, and it could compact itself for travel and to be loaded up onto planes and stuff. That's the only definition I can give to it.
Yeah, I think if we saw it raise up, like if it had the ability to raise up and show itself as more of a off-roading vehicle, I think that would have been a bit better.
And I don't think it was designed as an off-roading vehicle. I actually think it was designed as an urban assault vehicle, and it ended up having going into that territory, and then that was causing problems.
I could see that. I could definitely see it just being designed as, if it's just an urban assault vehicle, then it's perfect. Absolutely perfect. But then we get to Ripley driving it, and could she hit any more things? She's basically treating the roads here like her own personal pinball machine.
So, on one hand, I really like the behind story. Now, I like the joke about she's a pinball machine. And again, made me want to watch the movie. I actually went to YouTube and pulled up a bunch of clips after listening to the show. But, again, the non-science fiction guy was like, you're arguing over a fictional vehicle and whether it would have made the clearance. And I'm like, so when we say a deep dive, that's a pretty deep dive. And so for me personally, I was kind of like, are we really going to spend a lot of time arguing over the height of the... So to me, that was a little too deep. I don't know. Eric, what were your thoughts?
See, I disagree with Dave in this point right here. Excuse me. That's the whole point of science fiction. It's to create another world, but yet make it believable. And if you look at something and you go, well, that just looks like a guy in a stupid suit, it's not believable as science fiction. If you look at a vehicle that's supposed to be this vehicle that travels in other worlds and other terrains, but it looks like a lowrider that's bottom was dropped, and it's got a speed bump worth of clearance. That's not going to be feasible, and so the science fiction part of the movie doesn't become believable. I think that's the fun of watching a great science fiction movie. It's to be able to believe it can really happen. And if there are things like that, you're like when you see the Land Cruiser in Star Wars, it's floating above the ground, and they get out of it, and it kind of wobbles a little bit, like it would if you got out of it and it was floating above ground. That's believable, And if it didn't move at all, you'd go, well, it didn't even move. Like obviously it's sitting on something. So that's what makes it believable. That makes the movie work.
And I tied in with that because they made a great point about how they show very few computers in the movie. Because that's the one thing. The minute you see something with a monocolor green screen, you're like, oh, what is this shot? So
my TRS-80's not booting up quickly enough.
So I got that point, but for me, I was kind of like, and I'll play another one that, again, just from my standpoint, it speaks for itself.
And Rob Knipe asked a question. This is a little bit away from our talk about aliens, but he has a comparison that we might want to use for an upcoming edition of the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast SmackDown. He says and asks, who would win, Buck Rogers or Han Solo? What do you think, guys?
Well, actually, you know what? I'm thinking this is one of your favorite films, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Why don't we start with you to tell us? Well, I think we're
going haywire here.
Yeah. Oh my God! Technical difficulties.
That's right.
It's running away with it.
But Buck Rogers versus Han Solo, and I just went. Well, first of all, do you guys actually have SmackDowns?
We do. See, we've recorded about 6 of them.
It's got to be me then, because I was like, really? So,
Eric, if we get to,
those are the discussions we have, Dave. It's like,
okay.
So who's more badass? Like, who's the best superhero of it all? It's got to be Batman because he doesn't have superpowers. He's just a guy out whooping up on some people
with some really cool toys.
Batman.
Well, they're gonna have that Superman versus Batman movies coming out.
Batman's got to win.
And I'll tell you, the origin of this idea of the SmackDown came from work. We would be working on a Saturday, and a bunch of us sitting around our computers, and somebody would say, well, who would win in a fight, Darth Vader or Gandalf? All right, little silence, and then everybody starts having this discussion, and we talk about it for 15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
And then another one would come up. Okay, the Death Star versus a Borg cube from Star Wars, Star Trek. Who would win? And these were the conversations we would have, and I thought, we really need to be recording these. And we've recorded, I think, 7 or 8 of them, and now we're going to be starting to release those as part of our Patreon premium content.
Oh, there you go.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of it, too, that when you guys really got into the deep stuff, I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about, and I'm like, that's usually a good thing. That means you're knee-deep into your niche, and only people that really love sci-fi, the true fans, are going to go, I'm with you, man. It's Batman all the way. No way. Han Solo's he's a wimp compared to whoever, right? So I found it funny, but that's again from my perspective. So okay, well that's good. So,
now one thing on that, Dave, is where I do appreciate the debate on whether or not the vehicle sits too low on the terrain for which it was built. I can appreciate that discussion, but Rem, I thought you did that a lot over the course of the movie, where we were nitpicking a lot of those little things throughout the movie and or throughout the episode of the podcast, and I thought it almost got to be overkill. Like there was almost too many of those minutia discussions where I thought a few of them would have worked. There was one where you talked about she's in the vehicle trying to drive it, and all of a sudden she can drive it perfectly, having never driven it, and you got to talking about, well, have you ever tried to drive a forklift, and you can't figure that out, and then you said, well, on the other hand, she's really just going from point A to point B. She wasn't really making any hard maneuvers or turns or anything, which was a great discussion, things like that. But then all of a sudden we get into 27 of them, and I thought, okay, well, we can probably trim it back to a few of that were really that really added to the plot and added to the movie.
Yeah, you even, I have a segment here where even I think it was you that said we're getting nitpicky.
Well, a couple other small points. Bishop says that the explosion that was the atmospheric processor is going to be like a 30-kilometer radius, which is pretty big. And then later he says that the explosion will be the size of Nebraska. And I had a look on Google Maps, and unless something radically happens to Nebraska in the future, it is a lot larger than a 30-kilometer radius.
Oh, Nats! I'm thinking you're into nitpicky territory now.
I am. I'm in the nitpicky territory thing, but
the good news is the first step is to there you go. But at least you were able to recognize you had gone there and then pulled it back. And again, one of my favorite parts was the trivia part. That for me, without being, Captain Sci-Fi guy, when I heard stuff like this, I was like, wow, that's really cool.
And they built the whole alien nest, built everything, and then they just left it there. Didn't dismantle the set whatsoever.
So it's still intact?
Well, it's not, because 1989, the crew for Batman came in, and they used the same power plant as the set for Axis Chemicals.
Oh, wow.
And they found almost the entire set still intact.
That's incredible.
I never knew that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. I got a picture in my mind now.
You're kind of seeing it in your head, huh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Perfect. All those pipes and everything? Yeah, nice.
See, and I love that, number one, because it was like, wow, I didn't know that they, used the same set as Batman when they did that. I love just the absolute, you can't get more of a human reaction. It's not scripted. It's so obviously not scripted, and this is just guys geeking out on sci-fi, and it's like, wow, that's awesome. I've just found this golden nugget. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. So I love the trivia stuff, because to me, I was like, oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. And it made me want to go, again, watch the movie. And so that was going to be one of my questions for you. What is the goal? Like, at the end of the show, what do you want your audience to do? Or what are you trying to accomplish with your show?
It comes back to digging deeper into the movies that we love. Now, people who like sci-fi really like sci-fi. You'll find some people like action movies, some people like romantic comedies. But with sci-fi fans, they tend to be more invested in these films. And that's why they kind of dig into the details and the minutia and the trivia. Because I think sci-fi gives us a glimpse of a potential future for us. And one of the things that I always liked about movies, especially sci-fi movies, is I've always wondered what the future is going to be like. And I love learning about us as a culture. And I think the goal here is to give people an opportunity to take a film that they may have watched and dismissed as being, oh, that was okay, and give them an opportunity to look a little more deeply at it and say, while you're watching this film, there's also this other stuff that's going on in the background, and here's where the motivation for this came up. Like when we talked about Godzilla, if Hiroshima and Nagasaki hadn't been bombed, Godzilla probably wouldn't have happened, and because it came out of that post-nuclear horror that the Japanese had faced. So we like talking about those things because science fiction is not so far away. Many times it's in our past and it's in our present, and we really love being able to point out where that thing that looks so far away really isn't so far away. And it gives us a better understanding of ourselves. And I think ultimately we all want to learn more about ourselves and how we function and how we tick and how to make our lives better. And I like looking at the future as a way to do that.
Well, even when I was listening, and I was thinking back to those days of watching the first Star Trek, and there was always, even the one, warning, what was that?
That was Lost in Space.
Those used to have kind of...
Danger, Will Robinson!
Yes, used to have a little bit of social commentary woven into that, and Star Trek did to a certain extent, and so there was always kind of a deeper story going on besides the fact that, wow, Kirk just kissed a green chick. There was more to it than that. So anyway, cool. All right, well, I just want to know that because it's kind of like it is super deep in again in the details and how it was working. And the one thing I heard that I was really impressed with was the whole SmackDown idea came from one of your members of Facebook. So I just had a quick clip.
Now
here.
Moving on to Facebook and Twitter comments. Of course, Facebook page at facebook.com/Sci-Fi Movie Podcast. Caleb Cunningham has a comment for us. Jonathan, can you read that for us?
Sure. He says, I love the movie, especially the director's cut. After the first one with its low budget, Aliens gave a more action feel with its bigger budget while maintaining the grimy corporate feel. It has some great lines, especially Hudson. At least in this movie, the synthetic person was not a killer. And the Hudson rant on the dropship en route to the surface, always remember to nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
It's the only way to be sure.
Nuke it from orbit. Oh, man. Oh, Hudson is just so awesome.
I think that might be a contingency plan now when we have office. Maybe
nuke it from orbit.
Yes, maybe we should suggest that at the Health and Safety Committee.
Good idea. Good idea. Any problems that come up, nuke it from orbit.
I like it.
So I like this clip for a couple reasons. Number one, it showed that you're engaging your audience. That was great. The other thing I thought you did, and I've noticed this now listening back to these, that you guys do a good job of. Number one, you guys introduce yourselves at the beginning, so you start to understand this is what Rem sounds like. This is what this person sounds like. And you do a good job of, even though obviously you know each other, you'll say, why don't, and I forget the guy that you just had read it. But Jonathan, I think you said, Jonathan, why don't you read this? It helps remember who's who. So I don't know if you guys do that on purpose, but I listen and I'm like, wow, they do a good job of that. For the first time listener, that we have to keep track of whose voice is who. And then the end of the clip is the fact that, again, the ever popular sarcasm comes in, and without making forced knock-knock jokes or things like that. You guys are just having fun and poking fun, and it made me giggle and laugh. So I was like, this is a cool, just quick snapshot of the show. You're engaging, and again, it also showed. So here you have this guy that's way deep into the content again, and I'm like, okay, so it may not be for me, but obviously these guys are attracting people just like them.
You'd be amazed some of the response we get from our feedback. One of our favorite guys is a guy named Brian who writes in on every show, and he's seen all the movies, and we seem to be on a bit of a track now where we're picking all of his favorite films, not even intentionally. So he gives us great feedback, and the audience has been fantastic because they bring up stuff that we haven't come across, and they always bring a new dimension and a new perspective. And yeah, of course, as most podcasters would say, without an audience, you don't have a show. And we've got a really good audience, really smart people.
Very cool.
I love some of the details that you offer in your analysis, where you talked about the first one being a horror flick and the second one, and Alien as the horror flick, Aliens as more of an action movie, and that's how the two really worked together. I thought that was great, and there were a lot of critiques and thoughts about the movie that really dug deep in the cinematography and the filmmaking that an average person probably wouldn't pick up on, but could recognize after you mentioned it, like that action versus horror. I thought that was great, and you just had a lot of views and opinions on the movie, which I thought really stood out. Rem, you in particular used at one point in time that it was one of your favorite movies of all time, and I thought that was great that you go out on a limb and actually wrap your arms around it and have a true opinion about something, rather than just taking that journalistic, non-opinionated point of view of reviewing the movie. I thought that was great too.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I tend to be. I'm kind of the wrangler between the two. Ian is the person who is very passionate and fiery in his views. Jonathan tends to be a little more laid back and logical, and I'm the guy who sort of keeps things moving forward. So a lot of times I will try to draw out their opinions, and I don't necessarily put out mine as much. But this film, because it was such a favorite of mine, I really wanted to gush on this one.
Well, I always talk about shows with multiple hosts. If you don't have differing opinions and points of view, there's really not a need for multiple hosts. And I think the way that you've described the three of you on this show, you all add something unique to the review process. And I really appreciated that about the whole composition of your podcast.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
How long have you guys been doing the show?
We're coming up on a year soon. We've just done episode, I think it's 46. So we launched July of last year, and we're getting ready to do a special 50th anniversary show around, I think it's going to be early July we do it.
And the one clip that it just dawned on me I don't have a clip of, and I will probably put it in post, is you decide to do a reenactment. So,
that was that was a bad idea.
Well, I was gonna ask you, is that a reoccurring thing? Or?
No.
Okay.
No. It's something, it was something I heard. You know Daryl Darnell from Spiral Media. He was doing a podcast on Almost Human, and what they would do is they would pick a phrase or a little dialogue, and they would get their listeners to vote on which piece of dialogue they liked the most, and the winner would get voiced. And I thought, we should try that. And I thought it was a great idea, and it sounded like a good idea in my head, but I think it was just a good idea in my head.
Yeah,
so we did it. It's a one-off. We've never done it again.
Okay.
Sometimes you gotta try things.
You gotta try. There you go. I'll give you credit for that. I just remember thinking, are you going to outact Sigourney Weaver in her? I just don't know that that's gonna work, buddy. But you know what? I give you kudos for trying it. I really do, because I was kind of just thinking, there's got to be a story behind this. Because
I was thinking we did it a little too seriously, and I think what we need to do is, if we do it again, we're going to pick a famous piece of dialogue, sort of like, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. I am your father. Right. But I think we should do it in Swedish accents or something like that. Luke, I am your father. And it's something to make it more silly. Maybe we'll try that at some point in the future.
Yeah, I just know for me personally, I was like, not sure what's going on here, but this is not working for me. So
yeah, it didn't really work for me either.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, there you go. You can cross that off the list.
It's off the bucket list.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your website.
Okay.
And so I've got it here for those of you watching. I have it on the screen, but we always like to describe what we're looking at. So the thing I loved about it, it's again, people are getting better at leaving white space. I'm not so great at that myself, just for the record. And so, I like the fact that you have a little bit of, Amazon links at the top. I'm like, all right, cool, and you got a donate button. The one thing I was surprised at is one of the ways you guys are funding your show is through Patreon, and you mentioned it on the show, but I didn't really see anything on the website to take me there. I'm like, I'm looking, and I'm like, I saw a donate button, which is awesome. I mean, that's through PayPal, but if I really wanted to go that route, and you had mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is brought to you by your one sponsor, and then Patreon, and I'm like, there really isn't much here on your website.
Yeah, and that's kind of on the list of things to do.
Yeah.
Being that I'm wearing the primary hat I'm pretty much the only guy who does the web stuff. It's something that I need to do, and as you guys probably know, there's a list of about 50 things we'd like to do, and I do need to do that. So yeah, that's certainly something I need to get done, because we want to make it as easy for people as possible to help support the show.
The one thing I just realized, I want to double check before is at the beginning of your show, it's all about please contact us, and okay, you do here on the show host page, you have one, feedback at sci-fi-movie-podcast.com. You might want to add a tab, because most people are looking for a contact us page, and as much as show host is, what show host, but most people are looking for just the blatant obvious contact us, something like that. And you have and this is, people are going to be like, man, Dave says the same thing every week. You have a lot of stuff about the host. There's not a lot about the podcast. So for somebody, it's like, you might want to have, about the podcast, and here's where we dig deeper into sci-fi, blah, blah, blah. Just so if somebody shows up on this, they're like, well, what's this? Okay, I know it's a sci-fi movie podcast, and I get the voice in your head that goes, well, duh, it's a sci-fi movie podcast. But explain to them how they're going to benefit and what to expect and that whole nine yards. Because you might have somebody on the hook here that, should I hit play or not? And if they go over and click on the about page, they're like, oh, this definitely sounds like something I'm into. Because you do a good job on the home page of, you've got a player right there. You don't have people searching for it. And you've got your iTunes buttons and everything else is above the fold, so you don't have to look at that. But Erik, did you have any thoughts on the website?
Well, with regard to what you were just saying there, Dave, I thought even adding the digging deeper into sci-fi movies tagline right below your masthead there would at least give an idea of what the movie's about. The Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, are you just telling me what the new releases are this week? Are we digging into a particular movie? I thought an about the show would be definitely helpful. I do love the clean nature of the website. It looks crisp. My favorite part about the website is the fact that I can buy the movie right there at the upper right corner of the website. So the movie that you're reviewing, there's a little Amazon link right there. Like, oh man, I haven't seen Alien forever, and there's a click right through to it. Or I haven't seen Blade Runner, and here's an opportunity to get it on Amazon. That's like instant gratification. I don't have to go search for it. You're helping me pick it up right there. I thought that was one of my favorite parts about the website.
And that's something that I change every week, too. I always make sure that as soon as we post the new show, in the case of Godzilla, of course, it's still a theatrical release, but if we're putting out a film that is DVD or Blu-ray, we'll certainly put a link to Amazon on there. But I like your idea about putting the contact tab and the about tab. I think that's a really good idea.
And something else you might want to consider, although I do like the links at the top, Amazon does have you can get a box where people can search. So if somebody's searching for aliens, and then if somebody searches through your box and then goes to Amazon, it uses your affiliate link.
Oh, so it's not bound just to that one particular
right.
piece that we put up there. Okay, so an Amazon search box.
That might be something, again, just to look into. But
one comparison I had between the website and the podcast itself, I love the bang, bang, bang of the recap here on the website where you see the positive, the negative, and the verdict. It's just, here it is, it hits us, and away we go with it. I love how it's short and it's succinct and it tells me exactly what I need to know. Listening to the podcast, this particular episode of Aliens, the podcast was almost as long as the movie was, Rem. How long is this podcast going to last?
It's a minute. It's a minute longer than the actual movie.
And Dave goes to look it up.
I did. Well, digging deeper into the length of podcast.
There was I think I counted 9 different segments in the show between the introduction and the overview and what worked and what didn't work and the first time I saw it and the feedback and the trivia and the scene reenactment and the casting and the
games and the legacy
notes. I was like, but with a long podcast like that, the thing that stuck out to me was there was no real table of contents at the front of the show. I didn't know what was coming. And so every time you rolled into, okay, now it's time for production notes, I'm like, oh, okay, there's another segment of the show. And then, okay, now it's time for trivia. Okay, now we're in another segment of the show. Now it's time for, I'm like, how many segments are there of this show?
Yeah.
Because you didn't hit me with that up front at the beginning of the show. I didn't know what to expect with what was coming. Not that all of those segments are bad, but if at the beginning you say, here's what we're going to do, we're going to go through what worked, what didn't work, we're going to critique the casting and critique some production notes and talk about the first time we saw it in the theaters or whatever segments you want to include. I just felt there were 9 or 10 different segments to the show, and it made the show feel really long.
Yeah, let me chime in on that for then we'll go to you. The one thing I thought was I think you went to the reenactment and then you went to something back to the movie. Like, I thought you were kind of done with the movie because you're doing this fun reenactment. I'm like, oh, well, okay, they're doing this at the end. It's fun. And then you went back to I think after that you went to what didn't work. And I was like, wow, we're going back to the movie? And then after the movie...
We talked about casting.
You went, yeah, and then it was the games and then the legacy. And again, at that point I was like, wow, okay, these guys really, this is a deep, deep dive. So, now, the fact that you said in the beginning of the show that your audience likes video games more than likely, and I'm like, okay, now I get the game segment. Because at the time, I'm like, really? We're here to talk about the movie. Why are we talking about games? But if that's what your audience is into, I thought it was kind of weird talking about a video game from the past because it's not like I'm going to run down to Redbox and rent, a video thing, but on the other hand, you're talking about a movie from the past, so some people may go, oh, remember that, and the alien used to come out, and it was in 64-bit, and it looked like a stick figure, and, so it might be a cool dusting off of memories kind of thing, but it was a bit long at times. Well, anyway, go ahead, Rem. I know you're dying to talk.
Well, I was looking at that, and I thought, oh, well, it's a good thing you guys didn't do Star Wars, because that was... 2 hours and change.
Wow.
So, and I really wanted to talk to you guys about a new kind of direction we've chosen, particularly because we've taken on Patreon. One of the things I've noticed is that when we do a longer show, it means I'm editing a longer show. And you can probably hear the amount of effort that I put into editing and making sure it sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm editing the show, what we're doing now is we're using a 1-hour clock, and we go with essentially, I think, 5 different segments. What worked, production notes, what didn't work, listener feedback, trivia, extra. And we do that on a 1-hour clock. So we have 15 minutes, 10, 10, 10, 10, 5. So what we started to do now is say, instead of us throwing all of these bits of trivia in there, each of us goes and finds our favorite one, because we're trying to make the show 1 hour, give or take 2 or 3 minutes. So the goal is to make a 1 hour show, because the polling that we've done with our fans on Facebook seems to indicate that 45 minutes to an hour, maybe an hour 10, seems to be the sweet spot for most people. So we've taken the cue from the audience and said, okay, we're going to have it about an hour. I'm going to impose roughly a radio clock, sort of like what you talk about, Eric, and this is what we're going to do. And when we're recording now, I've got a timer that I follow. So first 15 minutes, when we hit our 15-minute mark, we're starting to move into the next thing. So we're trying to follow a little more structured format to get us to that 1 hour point. So we're being more selective about the content that we use. I'm watching the clock more carefully, and then we save all of the content that we want to throw in afterwards for a Patreon after show.
There you go.
So what we do is we say, we're going to get everything that we can in, the most important stuff in, and then we keep recording. Sky's the limit. Whatever you want to do it. No format, no editing, nothing. And we just roll. And then that becomes the content that we offer to our Patreon subscribers afterwards. So that's the direction we're going. But I wanted to see what you guys thought of that.
Well, number one, in my opinion, of course, Mr. Not Sci-Fi Guy, anytime you ever have to take the same topic and cover it in less time, you're going to end up with a better speech, because you've got to figure out what is the golden nugget. And I don't have time to pick 5. I can only pick 2. Yeah. So if somebody says name your top 5 albums, you're like, okay, it's probably this, this, and that. Now you say, okay, which top 2? You're like, ooh, now I got to think, because it makes you the cream rises to the top. So I would think your show is probably going to be, the golden nuggets are going to be up the top. You won't have to look so hard for them, Mr. Erik.
I love it. I love the idea of the show clock, obviously, but I like the fact that you're narrowing it down to the same 5 segments each show, and it's exactly what your audience comes looking for in that hour-long podcast. I think that's great, and I like the Patreon extras that you can get after the fact. And if it's a no-holds-barred thing, that's great. If afterwards we're talking about Han Solo versus Buzz Lightyear, or whatever the debate happens to be in the afterthought, I love it. I think that's a great idea. I think it's a great idea.
Because we found that there's so much content that sometimes, because we go so heavily into these movies, we find that there's a lot of stuff there, and it's caused us to be more selective. I can pick one trivia bit. Okay, what's the coolest one I can find? And then, of course, we can save that for the after show, and it seems to build value. And then I think for the people who don't subscribe and just listen to the podcast, I'm hoping that they're going to get a tighter show and a more consistent time frame. Instead of saying, hey, this one's 65 minutes, this one's 138, this one's 45, and this one's 212. So I think for the listeners, they're going to get a show that's within about 2 minutes of an hour.
Yeah, because you can take a scene in a sci-fi movie and make that into an hour-long podcast. You can just take one scene, the Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader scene in one of the lightsaber battles, and just dissect the set and the scene and the dialogue, the lack of dialogue, and make that an hour-long discussion. I mean, you could turn anything into an hour, and I think by focusing the show and trying to get it all into 1 hour, you're going to get the best of the best, and it's going to make the discussion great. Trivia can last all day long. I mean, you can come up with so many different trivial facts about a movie, but finding the best couple and putting it in that hour, I think will be great. And I love the stories that you tell in the podcast. Every now and then, you guys will get into a story. You talked about the first time you saw the movie in the theater and how you got the goosebumps and you're on the edge of your seat, and it was amazing. And the movie came to life for me. And the fact that you were sitting there watching it and described it in such great detail, I thought was one of my favorite parts of the entire podcast.
Yeah, the only other thing that I thought, because I'd already seen it, you guys never announced spoilers. But on the other hand, how old is this movie?
1986.
Yeah, I think everybody should have seen it by now. So it wasn't like, oh, I was going to watch that. You've had, whatever, 15 years to see it. I think you could have moved a little quicker on that. But that was the only thing. I thought, well, they are spoiling the movie, and I'm like, it's whatever, almost 20 years old. I'm like,
that's a good question. That one actually came up probably last week. We were talking about it, and it got started as a discussion about Godzilla because it's still in the theaters, and we're planning on doing X-Men Days of Future Past. And I think one of us mentioned that maybe we should do some sort of spoiler alert and just say, look, we're going to be talking about the film, and we're going to be spoiling details in the ending. Maybe something in the intro?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
For me, because there are times if I for the longest time when Dexter went off the air, and I'm like, no, I haven't seen it yet. I'm waiting for it to come out on Netflix. I didn't really want it to be spoiled. So
maybe the spoilers part of the Patreon after stuff, where it's no holds barred, and you can expect spoiler alerts in the Patreon audio. And so if you don't want to be spoiled on whatever particular movie it is we're discussing, you can listen to the regular podcast, but don't listen to the Patreon audio because we talk about it all in that audio.
That's a good idea, and to give the listener a sense of what's coming up, I think we could do it a couple of different ways, but as long as they know what to expect, it's the important thing.
I agree, yeah.
The other thing I like about the Patreon idea that I've seen other people do, and it always rubs me the wrong way, you're giving them a complete show, and oh, by the way, if you want to go deeper, you can go into the Patreon and get that stuff. What drives me crazy is I've literally heard people fade out an interview mid-answer and go, if you want to hear the rest, it's
really?
$29. Yeah. And there was an internet marketing guy, and I was like, you got to be kidding me, because it was a really good interview. And in the middle of the answer, he was like, okay, well, for the rest of this, and I was like, wow, that was not cool, because I was really sucked in, and I wanted to go give him the $29 he wanted, but I just didn't out of protest. I was like, nope, I'm not. If I do that, he'll do more of this, and this needs to be stopped. Doggone it! So I didn't want to support that. I didn't want to support that kind of action. So
you showed him.
That's it. Doggone it.
Way to go, Dave.
Yeah.
And as a listener too, I would find that really insulting as a listener, because I'm always trying to look at it from a listener's perspective.
Yeah, it was a pretty hard sell. I was like, really? But he's literally an internet marketer, and I was like, well, yes, you are, my friend. So, we've talked about your website, talked about the content. Let's listen to the end of the show.
Scary stuff happening all the time. Turn the volume up, turn the lights down, and just scare the crap out of yourself.
Oh, man. Nailed it.
Exactly.
It.
And thank you, gentlemen. And that'll put a wrap on this edition of the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast and our review of 1986's Aliens. And we invite you to get more information and the show notes at sci-fi-moviepodcast.com. We've got our email address there. We've got show notes. We've got links where you can buy the DVDs, and we also have some information about our Patreon account.
No, we don't.
We're inviting you to actually get involved with the show and become one of our backers. It's sort of like a Kickstarter, but with Patreon, you're able to create an account and then pledge a certain amount of money per month, which is used to keep the lights on, keep the microphones going here at the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast. So if you'd like to get involved, you can contribute as little as $1 a month, maybe $5 a month, $10 a month. We take all this money and we sink it into things like hosting costs, into domain registration. We're looking at releasing more podcasts, so we're going to have more bandwidth very, very soon. So if you're able to help us out, we certainly would appreciate it. Go to Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, and we'll get you the link to our Patreon account, and you can get involved and become a backer for the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast. We thank you, as always, for listening, and we will talk to you next time on the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast.
The Sci-Fi Movie Podcast.
What happened?
I don't know.
It shows it's still playing. It sounded great. I apologize. I listened to the clip and, okay, this is good. So either A, it didn't sync the rest of it when I unplugged my iPad or something like that, but you had a cool little clip and off you went. So the only thing I would say about the Patreon thing, and it's good because you're sending people to your website to go to Patreon. Don't go to, like, let's say patreon.com/sci-fi movie or whatever it is. Always send them to your website, because not that they ever would, but in the event Patreon ever goes away, if you've sent them to a link you control, you can send that to another support system that has replaced that.
Points.
I had a case where Audible, I go through audibletrial.com/Dave, I think is mine, and they switched the people that handle their affiliate program, and luckily they kept all the old links, but I'm like, man, I got 15 episodes with that link in there, and I'm like, I should have used my website /Audible or something like that, something I could control.
Okay.
So just try to maintain control of that.
That's good point. Good point.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, they're doing great, and a lot of people are making some decent money over there, but you definitely would want to do that. So, but we always like to kind of wrap up things, and that's one of the things I liked about the ending. We started out, that's why I put that in the clip. I'm not sure who that was that said that, but just did a nice quick wrap up. Turn the lights off, scare the crap out of yourself. I'm like, yeah, there you go. That's what it's about. So I like that. I really like the rapport that you guys have with each other, and you kind of joke with each other and kind of poke fun. It is, three bros hanging out talking about stuff they love. And for having multiple, you guys aren't in the same room, right?
No, I'm in Sydney, BC. Jonathan's in Victoria, BC, and Ian is in Surrey on the mainland. So we do I guess what's a triple ender.
Okay.
So we use Skype as a communication form. They record their own audio into Audacity, and then they Skype them over to me, and I combine them all in Adobe Audition, and then I do all the combining of the tracks into one track.
Got it. Yeah, because I thought the audio of you guys recording, was good, because I thought you did this via Skype, and I'm like, wow, I don't know how they got that good, but I'm thinking you're leveling it out and things like that. So, Eric, I think you had some comments about some of their audio, though, right?
Yeah, I thought the audio was overall really good. The audio clip they used at the very beginning of the movie, I was kind of confused about whether that was from the actual movie, because it wasn't a scene that I remembered. And then after you got to talk about Newt throughout the episode, that bounced me back and remembered there. The other thing, earlier we were talking about letting your audience know what's coming. I was surprised at some of the audio clips that you used from the movie that had profanity in it, because I didn't expect that coming. Mm-hmm. And that kind of caught me out of left field, because there wasn't anything at the beginning that just kind of said, hey, be careful. So luckily I didn't have the kids in the car while I was listening, but that was just something. If there are movies that you're using, I don't watch a lot of sci-fi. I watch the big names. I've watched Star Wars and E.T. and some of them, but and I've seen Aliens. I just didn't remember it being dropping the F-bomb so much. Luckily he didn't play all 18 that he used, but it kind of surprised me when it happened in the episode. So that might be a consideration, that you just kind of put that little flag at the beginning if it happens to be contained somewhere in the episode.
Okay, that's a good idea. Now, is there a level of profanity that, without actually using it, is it George Carlin's 7 words that should be avoided, or do you think all levels of profanity should be avoided? We try to keep it relatively family friendly.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it should be avoided necessarily. I think if it's in your show, let me know that it's coming. Okay. Hey, because there are interviews that I've heard on podcasts where the guest may use a profane word somewhere in the interview, and the interview says, hey, just to be aware, during this interview he drops the F-bomb around 33 minutes, so just be aware that's coming.
Okay.
And then so that way, as I'm listening and we're getting close to 33 minutes, if Simon's sitting in the back seat, I may want to kind of adjust the audio for a minute until we get past that point in the show.
Yeah.
But if he's not there, I just let it roll.
Okay.
It's not that it bothers me. I just want to be concerned with the other people in the car when I'm listening.
Especially kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of people are listening in the car on the way to work or taking the kids to soccer or whatever it is. And
where podcasting used to be just an individual earbud sort of experience. The way cars are being built now, and you can patch it in through the dashboard and listen as if you were listening to the radio in the car. You have to be aware of which choices you're making.
That's a good idea, and I hadn't thought about the idea of kids being around. Being that I don't have kids, it's really not a consideration, but it is something that we'll have to look at.
other than that, I loved it. The things I really loved about the show, the way Dave said, your rapport, I think is great. I think you guys have a great show. I think all three of you add something unique to the show. It isn't repetitive, and I love the way you interact and you use each other's name quite often, so you get to know the characters. I think your show's very inviting in that way. I also love the fact that you related this movie back to the original and back to the original review that you had, and the way the two interact with each other, and how the sequel actually worked for this one, where the following sequels didn't really work, and there was no need to waste your time with that. I love that, and I really love the stories that you told on this episode. The fact that you saw it in the theater, and the feeling that you got sitting there watching that movie, and the sense, the emotions that it evoked within you as you were watching it. I thought those were all great points in the show. The things that I'd love to see you work on a little bit, and it sounds like you're doing it with the show clock, is make it a little more concise and focused on hitting that hour, and instead of having 10 different segments, you're focused on the 5 strongest that you're going to have within the show. I think that's a very wise move. We talked about the language issue and the fact that the show felt really long because of all those segments. I think you're working on all of those things. Be careful on, I know we're digging deep into sci-fi movies for those really super sci-fi fans, but be careful on some of the terms that you use when they get a little too geeky or sci-fi-y. Make sure you explain what you mean by them, so your show continues to be inclusive for those people who are new to the show or new to the genre. And one point in particular that stuck out to me, you talked about front screen projection technique, and I had no clue what that meant. And you had a little discussion about it, like, yeah, they used to use it in movies past, they don't use it anymore, and I'm going, great, what is it? How does that do? And what's the opposite of front projection screen technique, or whatever it's called? So as you're using some of the terms or acronyms within the show, make sure that you're explaining those to the everyday casual consumer that has come to your show. Because when you do that, those people that do know go, oh yeah, that's what I thought it meant. And those people that don't know are now in the loop. So it just kind of helps them along and helps them enjoy your show.
Okay, that's a good point. And I think there's that tendency we have to assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. And
yes,
yeah, sometimes I have to sort of step back and say, wait a minute, I know this really well, but maybe everybody else doesn't. Yeah.
Right. Just a little refresher. And when you do that, make sure you don't go, of course, or anything like that to make people feel dumb. It's like, well, of course you all know what that means, because then people go, oh, yeah, sure, I knew what that means. What's that mean? Where's the book? I can look that up. So overall, Rem, I love the show. You and I have talked about it before. I think you have a great show. I think it really feels like a show, which is what I really appreciate about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, again, not a huge sci-fi guy, but I really enjoyed the trivia stuff. For me, that's what I liked. I liked the you guys would eventually, you're trying to, without trying to be like Shecky the podcaster, you guys had just natural sarcasm and things like that. So I enjoyed that part of it. And your audio again was good. All your technically wise, your audio was fine. Your tags were there. I think you guys do a good job with your branding. The fact that when you come to the website, you have your little robot guy with the cinematic little clapper gizmo, and that's also on your album art. So yeah. I was like, that's just good branding, and I was like, all right, cool. Somebody's again thinking ahead here, and it just little stuff like that. It's just icing on the cake. That it just shows that I'm not trying to do this for free. I always call it the serious hobbyist. This is somebody who we're having fun and we're talking about movies with my buddies, but I want it to sound good. I don't want to put out crap, and I want this to be good and entertaining. And so I thought all those were good. For me, again, I didn't enjoy the nitpicking, but I'm not your target guy. So when you're talking about some of that stuff, I'm like that. I'm glad to hear that you have retired the acting out part. Although I like the idea of bringing it back with the Swedish accent. That could be cool.
Yeah.
Luke. Yeah. Or maybe done in Pig Latin. That could be fun.
Right. You could do what if somebody else was cast at that part? What if Barney Rubble was cast as Darth Vader? What would it sound like? And then you could read it in a different voice.
So that'd be fun. And just maybe add like a contact page on your website, and look into again, how you do your Amazon stuff is your thing, but you might want to put up a generic one. So in the event somebody finds an episode from episode 2 and they're like, oh wow, I want to go check out this thing, and they're like, oh, this is the link for the the new stuff, have some sort of generic Amazon thing to go on there. And unfortunately, Netflix has kind of somewhat temporarily closed their affiliate program. I was looking at the other day in preparation for the show, and I went to sign up, and it used to be through Google had an affiliate network, and when they closed that down, shocking that Google would close something. Apparently Netflix, and so for whatever reason, Netflix hasn't picked up another network. I don't know who they're doing it through, but when I went to it, it was like, yeah, this is temporarily suspended. Stay tuned kind of thing. So I was like, man, that would be a great product for you to promote, would be Netflix.
Yeah, actually, we had somebody mention that, and I never thought of it. So that makes sense too. I'll make a note of this, and look at how we might be able to incorporate that, because it's a natural fit for us.
But it sounds like you're having a lot of fun. Sounds like you're connecting with your audience, and wish you the best of luck with it.
Can I ask you a question regarding calls to action?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had said, Erik, you'd mentioned the idea of keeping one uniform call to action at the end of the show. So what we do is we say, go to the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast. All of the contact information is there. Is it good to sprinkle in other calls to action, like maybe between segments? I could say something like, and make sure to subscribe to our show in iTunes. Maybe do a little bit of housekeeping between segments as smaller calls to action?
I think so. I think you could mention that throughout the show. I think it'll be less effective if you're doing it in the middle of the show and say, hey, oh, by the way, we're on iTunes, so if you'd like to give us a review, you can make it present within the show. I wouldn't expect a lot of reaction from those calls to action within the middle of the show, but it could be used as creating that top of mind awareness. So when you do make that call to action at the end of the show for that particular thing, people will remember it more because you've been talking about it. It isn't something that's brand new. So if you want to mention that fact that you'd like an iTunes review in the middle of the show and things like that, that's perfectly fine. But I wouldn't expect to get a lot of reaction from that unless people are actually listening to it on a computer while they're sitting right there in front of it. What I tend to do is rotate my calls to action at the end of my show. So where I might do go to the website, go to the website, go to the website, for 2 or 3 shows. Then the 4th show, I might mention it's on iTunes, or it's on Stitcher, or share it with a friend, or some other call to action. Check out the workbook, something like that. So I might rotate the calls to action at the end of the show, but all information is available on the website. So
okay, I appreciate that. That's a good idea.
The website is my main call to action, but I'll rotate a couple others in there occasionally.
I used to listen to a podcast that did a good job of just branding, of just, we'll have a link to this out in the show notes. Don't forget, website is blah blah blah.com. And so by the time you got to the show, you definitely knew their website. And sometimes I wonder when I say things like, schoolofpodcasting.com/410, is somebody going to really remember it was episode number 410? But if nothing else, it's getting your website out there again. So I've seen people do that because especially if you don't take a lot of time to say your website, if there's not a lot invested in it, it's not so you're not really bugging me because you wasted 3 seconds to say your website again. So for me personally, I didn't find it offensive if somebody said, hey, don't forget, you can find this out at our website, blah blah blah.com, and then they do another segment, and then maybe then again, if you want more info, here's our website, blah blah blah. And it was just, so by the end, and I knew what they were doing. It's like you're trying to get me to remember your website, and it's working. So that to me, it didn't really bother me that they were throwing that in every 10 seconds.
And when they go to your website and your show notes, you could surely have multiple calls to action in the show notes, because they're going to the show notes to seek out whatever it is you've discussed and what they're looking for. So if you want to review in iTunes and you include that in the show notes, and you have contact information, and you have a link to buy the movie, and you have all of the things in the show notes, and then all your calls to action are everything you need, go to the show notes.
Yeah. You've done a great job of having a search box very easy to find above the fold. So if I'm looking for, Star Wars, if I do that right now on your website and hit search, it takes me right there, Sci-Fi Movie Podcast Star Wars, and I'm right there. So
how long is that episode, Dave?
Let me see if I click on it. I don't know if it's going to tell me.
It actually doesn't. You know, a friend of mine had mentioned to me that I should put the length of the podcast right at the front of the show. So that's on the front of the most recent 3 or 4 episodes. But I'd say about 2 and change. 2 and change. Yeah.
Well, there's actually 2. There's the Star Wars and the Star Wars Holiday Special,
which you absolutely have to watch and have to listen to. It is widely regarded as the worst piece of television ever committed to the airwaves.
There was actually a Star Wars
Yep.
Christmas special.
In 1978, they had all the actors. They had Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford. Yeah, it is the most amazingly bad thing I've ever seen on television. But we had to talk about it because, hey, it was Christmas.
That was great.
It was a Christmas miracle.
Well, Rem, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast review show.
Thanks very much, guys.
You weren't crying, so that's good.
No, I'm going to save the tears for later. I have a really great poker face, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pour some red wine and put on some Journey and console myself. Maybe I'll cheer myself up by watching Game of Thrones from last night.
There you go. Excellent. And tell everybody where we can find your podcast.
You can find us at sci-fi-moviepodcast.com. Thank you.
Erik, where can we find you?
You can find everything Podcast Talent Coach online at podcasttalentcoach.com.
And you can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. And if you'd like to be reviewed, somebody asked me today, how many are in the can? You know, do we have a big long line? And the line's not very long at this point. We have a few people that keep saying, yes, I'm going to sign up. And I'm saying, click that button. So
click that button.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you on the show. And just
scheduling has been the bane of our existence, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So go to podcastreviewshow.com/review me. If you just go to Podcast Review Show, we have a big button right in the upper right-hand corner as well. Speaking of easy to find things. And we would love to have you on the show. So until we meet again, thanks again for tuning into the Podcast Review Show. And remember, there's always room for improvement. How's that for a tagline? What do you think?
I like it.
Yeah,
roll with it.
There you go. We'll go with that. So thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Take care. And that is the end of the show.